Have you ever witnessed a moment so shocking, so unjust, that it forced you to question everything you thought you knew about progress and equality? Imagine being a black woman who beat the odds, worked her way up from nothing, and finally became the CEO of a prestigious hotel, only to be thrown out of your own building, humiliated in front of staff and guests simply because of the color of your skin. This is not just a story about power and position. It is about the invisible chains that still bind black professionals in America, no matter how high they climb. It is about resilience, about fighting back, and about what happens when a leader decides that enough is enough. Today you're going to hear a story that goes far beyond headlines and viral clips. This is a real-life account of a woman who refused to stay silent, even when she was told she did not belong. Her journey is one of grit, heartbreak, and, ultimately, radical action. You'll see how years of microaggressions and outright discrimination boiled over in a single, unforgettable moment. You'll feel her pain, her rage, and the determination that drove her to make a decision few would dare, firing every single person who thought they could silence her. But before we dive in, I want to ask you, have you ever felt out of place in a space you fought hard to enter? Have you ever been told you didn't belong no matter how hard you worked? Share your experience in the comments below. Like this video if you believe that true leadership means standing up against injustice no matter the cost. And if you want more real stories that reveal the truth behind social justice, discrimination, and the fight for equality, hit that subscribe button now. Your engagement helps amplify voices that too often go unheard. Let's start at the moment that changed everything. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning, the kind of day when a leader arrives early to greet the staff and ensure everything runs smoothly. But for the CEO, that day began with tension in the air, a feeling she had learned never to ignore. She walked through the grand lobby, her presence commanding but her smile genuine, greeting guests and employees alike. Yet behind the polished counters and cordial exchanges, whispers moved through the halls. Some staff members exchanged uneasy glances, while others avoided her gaze entirely. Suddenly, two security guards approached her with a stern expression. The hotel's manager, someone she had trusted and mentored, was close behind, carrying a clipboard with trembling hands. "Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to leave the premises," the manager said, voice low but resolute. For a brief moment, the world seemed to stop. The CEO tried to understand what she was hearing, certain there must be a misunderstanding. She asked for an explanation, her voice calm but edged with disbelief. The manager's answer was vague, filled with platitudes about procedures and company policies. No one looked her in the eye. As the reality set in, shock turned to humiliation. Guests in the lobby turned to watch, some whispering, others staring in open disbelief. The CEO stood her ground, refusing to be hurried, her dignity intact even as the staff tried to usher her out. She looked around and saw the faces of employees she had hired, mentored and promoted. Some looked away in shame. Others seemed almost relieved. It was not just about her removal. It was about a deeper rejection, a statement that her presence was no longer welcome. For a black woman who had fought to claim her space in a world that constantly questioned her worth, this moment was both devastating and clarifying. The CEO felt a surge of anger and sorrow, not only for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told, explicitly or implicitly, that they did not belong. The humiliation was public, raw, and unforgettable. Even after she left the hotel, escorted by guards through doors she had once opened with pride, the sting of that day lingered. Yet, within that pain, something else began to grow, a spark of resolve, a silent promise to herself that this injustice would not go unanswered. Before she ever set foot in that hotel as its leader, her story began in a world far removed from luxury lobbies and polished marble floors. Born into a family where every dollar was stretched, she learned early what it meant to struggle and what it meant to dream beyond circumstance. Her childhood was marked by small victories: a scholarship won, a part-time job landed, a hard-earned acceptance letter to a state university. Each step forward was met with new challenges, but also with a growing sense of purpose. Even as a young girl, she knew she wanted more, not just for herself, but for others who looked like her. In college, she faced her first taste of open prejudice. Professors questioned her place in advanced classes, classmates dismissed her ideas, and administrators subtly steered her away from leadership positions. She worked twice as hard, staying up late to perfect assignments, seeking out mentors who understood the barriers she faced. Every obstacle became fuel, every slight a reason to keep pushing. She took pride in being the first in her family to graduate, carrying their hopes as she walked across the stage. After graduation, the business world beckoned, but it was not welcoming. Interviews were a gauntlet. Sometimes she saw the flicker of surprise on a hiring manager's face when she walked in, as if her resume and her appearance could not possibly belong to the same person. She started at the very bottom, doing work others avoided, and always with an eye toward something greater. She watched, listened, and learned, absorbing lessons not only about finance and hospitality, but about the coded language of power. Her rise was not meteoric. It was slow, deliberate, filled with setbacks and betrayals. There were jobs she lost not because of performance, but because someone with a familiar name or face wanted her gone. There were mentors who turned cold the moment she started to excel, colleagues who stole credit, and customers who refused to speak to her directly. But with each wound came a lesson. She learned to speak up, to document everything, and most importantly, to believe in her own vision, even when nobody else did. Becoming a CEO was never just about ambition. It was about breaking a cycle, about creating a space where others could see what was possible. She understood the weight of representation, the way a single black woman in leadership could inspire hope or spark resentment. When she finally walked into that hotel as its leader, it was more than a job. It was a statement, a promise, and a dream realized. But as she would soon discover, the higher she climbed, the more fiercely the world tried to pull her back down. Even before that fateful morning in the hotel lobby, the CEO's life had been a series of silent battles against the invisible walls of structural racism. From her earliest days in corporate America, she noticed patterns that others tried to explain away or ignore entirely. There were meetings where her voice was drowned out, projects where her contributions were minimized, and promotions that slipped through her fingers despite her qualifications. The rules always seemed to shift, just out of reach, designed to keep her and others like her in place. Sometimes the discrimination was subtle, a condescending tone, a backhanded compliment about her articulate speech, or a sudden shift in body language when she entered the room. Other times, it was blatant, being mistaken for a secretary in her own office, security asking for her identification, while her white colleagues walked past without question, or overhearing jokes that cut to the bone. Each moment was a reminder that, for black professionals, success often comes with a price, one paid in exhaustion, isolation, and the constant need to prove yourself worthy. Despite these obstacles, she learned to move through the world with both vigilance and grace. She built networks of support among other black professionals, sharing resources and stories in whispered conversations over coffee. Together, they traded strategies for survival, how to document incidents, how to find allies, how to protect their mental health in spaces where they were never fully welcome. She became fluent in the language of code switching, adapting her mannerisms and speech to fit rooms that rarely reflected her own experience. Yet as she moved higher in the ranks, the challenges only grew sharper. The very presence of a black woman in a position of authority was seen by some as a threat. Rumors spread, resistance grew, and she found herself the target of both passive-aggressive sabotage and outright hostility. Sometimes her decisions were second-guessed not on merit, but on the assumption that she could not possibly know what she was doing. Other times, she was asked to be the spokesperson for diversity while never being truly accepted as an equal. This constant pressure weighed heavily, but it also fueled her determination. She refused to be defined by the low expectations others set for her. With every new challenge, she became more committed to changing the culture around her, to opening doors for those who would come after. Her journey was not just about individual achievement, but about pushing back against a system designed to exclude. In this context, the events at the hotel were not isolated. They were the culmination of years spent navigating an environment shaped by bias, where every success was shadowed by suspicion and every mistake magnified. For her, that morning was simply the latest and most public reminder that in America, the fight for dignity and respect is far from over. The day she first walked into the hotel as its CEO was a moment of triumph unlike any she had known. For years, the building had been just another address on her commute, an unremarkable symbol of a world closed off to people who looked like her. But when the keys finally landed in her hands, the weight of their significance was overwhelming. It wasn't just her victory, it was a win for her family, her mentors, and every young black person watching from the sidelines, waiting to see what was possible. Owning or leading a hotel had never seemed attainable in her childhood neighborhood. The word luxury rarely applied to anything within reach, yet she remembered standing outside hotel lobbies as a girl, peering through glass doors at a world that sparkled with possibility. The marble floors, crisp uniforms, and quiet confidence of the people inside had always felt like a distant dream. Now those doors opened for her, and behind them a team waited to be inspired by her leadership. Her first months in charge were a whirlwind of introductions, handshakes, and promises. She met with every department, from housekeeping to management, eager to understand their needs and hopes. She listened carefully, aware that her presence was both celebrated and scrutinized. Many staff members were curious, some skeptical, a few openly resistant, but she pressed forward, determined to create a culture rooted in respect and opportunity. The hotel quickly became a symbol in the community. Local news covered her appointment, shining a spotlight on her achievement and sparking pride among residents. Parents brought their children to see the Black Lady CEO who had broken barriers. She hosted job fairs, reaching out to neighborhoods that had been overlooked in the past. The hotel was not just a business, it was a statement that excellence knows no color, and that leadership is possible for anyone with vision and resilience. But success brought new challenges. Some longtime staff, accustomed to a different kind of leadership, struggled to accept her authority. There were whispers in the break rooms, rumors about her qualifications, and passive resistance to her ideas. She recognized these signs from earlier battles and met them with empathy but also firmness. She knew that change is uncomfortable and that true transformation requires time and trust. Despite the friction, she pressed on. Under her leadership, the hotel began to thrive, attracting new guests and earning awards for both service and community engagement. Each milestone felt like validation, proof that she belonged. Yet beneath the surface, tensions simmered, an undercurrent of resentment that would soon rise to the surface in the most painful way imaginable. Trust is the foundation of any organization, but for her, building trust in the hotel proved to be more complicated than expected. In the beginning, she worked tirelessly to unite the staff, believing that shared goals and open dialogue could overcome even the deepest skepticism. She held regular meetings, invited feedback, and created opportunities for staff to voice their concerns. Still, beneath the polite exchanges, there lingered a stubborn resistance, one that went beyond differences in management style. It started with small acts of defiance, tasks left undone, instructions quietly ignored, emails unanswered. Some managers were slow to implement her directives, subtly undermining her authority without ever confronting her openly. She noticed alliances forming among certain employees, pockets of dissent that met after hours to complain about new policies or changes to long-standing traditions. She heard her name spoken in hushed tones, felt the coldness in the air during morning briefings, and saw smiles disappear the moment she entered the room. As weeks turned into months, the division within the staff became more pronounced. Employees who had once been cordial began to close ranks, supporting each other while freezing her out. She watched as talented new hires, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds, were isolated or given the cold shoulder. The hotel's culture, instead of evolving, seemed to be growing more rigid, clinging to an unspoken code that rejected both her leadership and her vision. The true depth of the problem became clear during performance reviews. While some employees embraced the chance for growth, others accused her of favoritism or unfairness, questioning every decision she made. Complaints surfaced in anonymous surveys, accusations that she was changing too much or making things uncomfortable. The feedback stung, not because of what was said, but because of what it revealed. Many in the hotel saw her not as a leader to follow, but as an outsider to resist. Rumors and gossip spread, sometimes making their way to guests. Small incidents were blown out of proportion, with some staff quietly hoping she would fail. Attempts to hold people accountable were met with pushback or outright denial. Even those she had once counted as allies became distant, afraid to be seen siding with her for fear of being ostracized themselves. Despite her efforts to bridge the gap, the environment became toxic. She began to realize that she was not only fighting for her legitimacy as a CEO, but for the soul of the entire organization. The resistance was not just professional, it was personal, rooted in biases that ran deep and long predated her arrival. Each day, she felt the pressure mounting, the sense that something would eventually break. What she did not know was just how soon that breaking point would come, and how profoundly it would change everything. The morning of her expulsion from the hotel would become etched in her memory forever. A day when every unspoken threat and simmering resentment finally erupted into open hostility. The sun had barely risen when she arrived at the hotel, determined to start her week with purpose. The lobby, usually alive with activity, felt unnaturally quiet. As she approached the front desk, she sensed the tension. A few staff members stood rigid, their eyes fixed anywhere but on her. There was a chill in the air that words could not explain. Moments later, she noticed the hotel manager walking toward her, flanked by 2 security guards. Their faces betrayed a mixture of discomfort and determination, as though rehearsing a scene they never truly wanted to play. "We need to ask you to leave the property immediately," the manager said, voice clipped and formal. No explanation, no warning, just a command delivered in public for all to witness. Her breath caught and she glanced around, trying to read the expressions of those nearby. Some employees looked away, embarrassed. Others watched with something close to satisfaction. She asked calmly but firmly, "On what grounds?" The manager fumbled for words, citing policy violations without specifics. When she pressed, the only answer she received was, "We're following standard procedure." Guests in the lobby paused their conversations to watch the scene unfold, confusion and disbelief flickering across their faces. The security guards shifted uneasily, but moved to escort her out, insisting that she not make a scene. As she gathered her things, the humiliation deepened. Every step toward the exit felt like a step away from years of hard work, from every sacrifice made to reach that point. She remembered the faces of those she had hired and mentored, faces now turned away. It was not just about her removal. It was a message sent to anyone who dared to break barriers or expect respect, where it was not freely given. Outside, the city's noise swallowed her heartbreak. She stood on the sidewalk, stripped of her title, her authority, and her dignity, all in front of colleagues and strangers alike. There was no official document, no board meeting, no chance to defend herself or explain, just the cold reality that the people she once trusted had chosen public humiliation over honest dialogue. That night, alone in her apartment, the events replayed in her mind. Every word, every look, every refusal to meet her eyes. The pain was sharp, but beneath it grew something stronger, a resolve born of injustice, a certainty that this story was not over. She realized that what had happened was bigger than her. It was a reflection of a system that punishes those who refuse to shrink themselves. In that moment, a decision began to form, one that would shake the very foundations of the hotel and everyone inside it. In the aftermath of her public expulsion, the CEO found herself at a crossroads defined by rage, sorrow, and an overwhelming need to reclaim her narrative. That night's sleep was impossible. She replayed every moment, questioning her choices, her trust, and even her own instincts. But with each hour, her sense of injustice only grew. She realized that the silence of her staff, their refusal to stand by her, their willingness to carry out orders without question, was as damaging as the manager's command. The entire system, from top to bottom, had revealed its true colors. She spent the next day consulting with her legal team, poring over contracts, policies, and ownership documents. As the true owner and chief executive, she discovered that, despite the spectacle orchestrated by her subordinates, she still held the ultimate authority to hire and fire. That knowledge was both a relief and a new source of pain. The hotel she had poured her soul into had turned against her, but the power to act was still hers. Now she faced a decision that would define her leadership, not just for herself, but for anyone watching. Word of the incident had already started to spread. Employees whispered in hallways, wondering what would come next. Some expected her to resign quietly. Others assumed she would simply let the humiliation slide and move on. But she knew that neither path was acceptable. To stay silent would be to condone what had happened, to give power to those who thrived on fear and exclusion. Instead, she chose something radical. On her first day back in the building, she arrived unannounced. Her presence sent shockwaves through the staff. She moved with quiet determination, making her way to the main office and summoning all department heads. Without raising her voice, she laid out exactly what had happened and why it could not be ignored. Then, in a tone that left no room for debate, she announced her decision. Every staff member who had participated in or enabled her removal was to be immediately dismissed. There would be no second chances for those who had proven themselves disloyal to the values she had worked so hard to instill. The announcement landed like a thunderclap. Some employees pleaded, others protested, but she stood her ground. It was not revenge. It was a reckoning. If the hotel was to survive, it would need a new culture, one rooted in respect, integrity, and true inclusion. As the former staff gathered their belongings and left, she felt the weight of her decision, but also a sense of liberation. She had chosen not to shrink, not to disappear, but to demand the dignity she deserved. That day, she was no longer just a CEO. She was a leader willing to risk everything for justice, even if it meant starting from scratch. News travels fast in the digital age, but few stories strike a nerve like the image of a black CEO reclaiming her power in the face of public humiliation. Within hours, the events at the hotel began to ripple across social media platforms, sparking debates, outrage, and fierce conversations about race, justice, and leadership in America. Headlines framed the story in stark terms. CEO expelled from her own hotel, fires entire staff in stunning reversal. News outlets called for interviews, local activists weighed in, and guests who witnessed the event began sharing their own accounts online. On Twitter and Facebook, the video clips, captured on phones by guests and staff, spread like wildfire. Some viewers saw her actions as the ultimate power move, a bold refusal to accept mistreatment. Others questioned her decision, debating whether firing the entire staff was justified or too extreme. Yet for many black professionals and allies, her story resonated on a deeply personal level. Messages of support flooded her inbox. Strangers wrote to thank her for standing up, for refusing to accept the subtle and overt racism that too often goes unchallenged. The hotel itself became a lightning rod for public attention. Protesters gathered outside, demanding accountability for the discrimination she faced. Local television crews arrived to cover the story, amplifying her voice and the larger conversation around corporate racism. Editorials appeared in newspapers, exploring not just the events of that week, but the wider history of exclusion faced by people of color in the business world. Comment sections were filled with personal stories, others sharing times they had been overlooked, underestimated, or outright rejected in their own careers. Not all reactions were supportive. Some critics dismissed her as too emotional or unprofessional, their words echoing the very stereotypes she had spent her life confronting. Anonymous emails accused her of playing the race card or destabilizing a successful business, but the overwhelming tide of public opinion was in her favor. She was invited to speak at conferences, featured in podcasts, and asked to share her insights with aspiring leaders. For the first time, her struggle became a symbol of something larger, a mirror reflecting America's unfinished work around race, equity, and power. Her courage inspired conversations not just about what happened in one hotel, but about how many similar stories remain hidden. The backlash she faced exposed how deeply resistance to change runs, but it also revealed a community ready to rally for real transformation. With her name trending nationwide and her story resonating far beyond the hotel's doors, the CEO realized she was no longer just fighting for her place in a single building. She was standing up for every black professional who had ever been told they did not belong, and she was determined to keep going, no matter how loud the world's opinions became. Rebuilding from the ashes of betrayal is never easy, but for the CEO, this moment became a test of everything she believed in. With nearly an entire staff gone, and the hotel's reputation the subject of national debate, the challenge before her seemed almost insurmountable. But she knew that real change was built on adversity, and that her greatest act of leadership was still ahead. The first days were marked by uncertainty. Hallways that once bustled with staff now echoed with silence. There were reservations to cancel, guests to reassure, and a mountain of logistics to handle. Yet, amid the chaos, she refused to surrender to fear. Instead, she put out a call for new talent, prioritizing not only experience, but also a commitment to fairness, inclusion, and growth. Job postings reached networks and organizations dedicated to supporting marginalized communities. She worked closely with local schools and training programs, offering internships and apprenticeships to young people who had never before considered a career in hospitality. Each new hire was chosen with intention. Interviews focused not just on skills, but on values and vision. The CEO made it clear, this hotel would be a place where every employee was respected, every voice heard, and every guest welcomed without prejudice. She invested in training that emphasized empathy, cultural awareness, and conflict resolution. Slowly, the energy within the building began to shift. Word of her efforts spread, drawing candidates who were inspired by her courage and commitment. The media, which had once fixated on the scandal, now covered stories of transformation, profiles of new staff members, testimonials from guests, and features on the hotel's renewed mission. Guests who had once boycotted the hotel returned, eager to support a place that stood for something greater than profits. The process was exhausting and often lonely. There were setbacks. Some guests remained skeptical, and not every new hire was a perfect fit. Yet the CEO's resolve never wavered. She celebrated every small victory, a successful event, a guest's kind review, a moment of laughter shared between colleagues. The pain of the past lingered, but it fueled her drive to make the hotel a model for what real equity could look like. Through it all, she leaned on her network, drawing strength from friends, family, and fellow leaders who believed in her vision. Together, they built something new from the ground up, a workplace defined by trust, respect, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves a seat at the table. The scars from her ordeal would never fully disappear, but they became part of a story of hope and resilience that inspired not just her staff, but an entire community watching from afar. Standing once again in the heart of the hotel she had fought so hard to rebuild, the CEO took a quiet moment to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. The walls that had once echoed with distrust and division now held the sounds of laughter, collaboration, and new beginnings. Her story of betrayal, pain, and fierce resolve had become more than a cautionary tale. It was a testament to the power of standing up for what is right, even when the cost feels impossibly high. She saw in her new team the hope that had once fueled her own ambitions. Employees of all backgrounds, working side by side, forging bonds built on mutual respect. Guests who returned not just for luxury, but for the sense of welcome and belonging the hotel now embodied. For many, her hotel had become a symbol, a place where justice, dignity, and opportunity were not just promised, but practiced every single day. But the impact of her story stretched far beyond the building's walls. Letters arrived from young women across the country who saw in her a role model, someone who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. Parents brought their children to meet her, wanting them to see firsthand what courage looked like. Her journey was featured in classrooms and boardrooms, sparking discussions about race, equity, and the responsibility of leadership. The CEO knew the fight was not over. Racism and exclusion remained realities, both subtle and overt. But her experience had taught her that silence is never the answer. Every time she spoke out, whether in interviews, speeches, or quiet conversations, she invited others to reflect on their own power, their own capacity to make change. Her greatest legacy, she realized, would not be a building or a brand, but the lives she inspired to reach higher, dream bigger, and demand justice. As she looked around her hotel, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a knowledge that her pain had not been in vain. She had transformed her greatest setback into an opportunity to rewrite the rules, not just for herself, but for everyone watching. And with every new day, she recommitted to the promise she had made on the darkest night of her life, to never let fear, prejudice, or doubt define her worth. Her story is an invitation to all who have ever felt invisible or underestimated. It is a call to stand tall, speak out, and never settle for less than the respect and dignity you deserve. The work continues, and so does the hope. If you made it to the end of this story, you know how powerful real resilience can be. If her journey inspired you, or if you have ever felt like an outsider fighting for your place, let your voice be heard. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories that matter. Leave a like if you believe in standing up against injustice, no matter the cost. And comment, "I believe in change," if this story moved you, even if just a little. And remember, there's another powerful story waiting for you right on the screen. Click through and keep this conversation going. Your voice, your engagement, and your courage are what keep these stories alive. Thank you for being here.